Join us. We're going to worship together.
The heavens Father, thank you so much for this time that we get to be coming into your presence, and we ask that you would honestly meet us here, that we would worship you in truth, and continue to guide the rest of this time. All this in your name, amen. Bring light to the darkness. You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears have gone. And I'm no longer a slave to fear, and I am a child of God. I'm no thank you for this time together. I ask that you would continue to be in the rest of this service and touch our hearts today, God. Amen. All right, before you sit down, we have a discussion question again today, so mingle somewhat. And the discussion question is, how many student loans do you have left to pay off? And if you don't have student loans, what other loans do you have?
Shoot me down, 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 down. Now I'm bulletproof because of you, and now I'm bulletproof because of you. You love me away. Now I'm not afraid, no matter what the world may say or what they do. Under control, my soul is untouchable because you've already won me. My victory is not in this flesh and bone, it's in the cross, and I know nobody's taking it from me. I got my armor now, no fear, no doubt, can't shoot me down. Yeah, I got my armor now, no fear, no doubt, gonna shoot me down, 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 down. Now I'm
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Lafayette Community Church. My name is Jacob, for those who don't know me. I do a couple things around here. I'm the Kidopoulos director. I also lead one of our community groups. I'm going to bring you this morning's announcements. So first of all, I want to draw your attention to our Connect cards. So we normally have paper copies of the cards for you guys to connect with us. Today we do not. We do have a digital Connect card though. So if you go to our website or our app, if you download our app and you go to our live event, you can scroll down under the main menu there and find our online Connect cards. This is how we connect with you. It's how we take our prayer requests and any thoughts or questions that you have about the sermon. We actually do look at these. We actually do pray for you. We actually do get a hold of you and answer your questions or comment on your thoughts. So please connect with us. Our first announcement beyond that is this next Monday, so not tomorrow, but Monday, March 26th, we have our Ladies Fellowship Night. So the ladies in the church get together and they do activities. This next one, we are not sure yet what the activity will be, but more information on that will be available soon. I tried to get involved with that. For some reason, they didn't want me, but any ladies that are interested in that are welcome to come. It's from 6:30 to 8 on March 26th. Next, we have Lafayette Transitional Housing Service Dinner. So the first Sunday of every month, we get together. Typically, it's by community group, but the first Sunday of every month, we go serve at Lafayette Transitional Housing. We serve dinner to the homeless. This next one is going to be on April 1st, which is Easter. So it's, I think, an even more fantastic opportunity to get involved, to serve, to show people the love of Christ. Next, we have Spring Fun Fest. So you probably noticed that colorful table out there. So every year, we host a Spring or Easter Fun Fest. So at Kennedy Park, this year it's at Kennedy Park on April 15th from 3 to 6. So classically, we've had over 1,000 people show up to this thing from the neighborhood over here. It's called The Reservation. We need a lot of volunteers. Typically, most people volunteer through their community groups. The community groups host booths of games and activities for the kids in the neighborhood to come and get involved. We have things like bounce houses. So we need volunteers to kind of supervise and to run all of those activities. So if you're interested, we have this table out here. You can sign up. We also need donations. So Pastor Jeff will talk about that here in a few minutes. And lastly, I want to talk about Kidopoulos. I am the Kidopoulos director. So we have out here, I've got some Shine sign-up sheets. We run our Kidopolis sessions in 4-month periods. So this next session is from May to August. It's our summer session, so we'll have a lot of fun things going on this summer. I want to encourage people to sign up to be involved. It's a lot of fun. Our slide up here says, the most fun you can have on Sunday mornings. I actually believe that. It's a lot of fun. It can be a big commitment, but if that's a concern for you, just talk to me. We can work something out so you don't necessarily have to be involved every single Sunday for a whole 4 months. We'll work something out. So I want to encourage everybody to come talk to me or to sign up to serve. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here. Love having you.
Today. We're going to talk about money again. It's going to be great. And in order to talk about money, I also want to talk about the Fun Fest because there's some money stuff that we're going to talk about with regard to Fun Fest. So I want to put up this next slide that you guys can see what we're talking about when it comes to our Fun Fest. Now, if you were here from the beginning of the year, you heard us talk about our annual budget. And as a church, our annual budget is coordinated in such a way that we don't, this year, we don't have the money in the budget to cover the Fun Fest from the general fund. And so we've been asking people to help out with the Fun Fest. Something you need to know about that is there are like 6 churches that are involved in this Fun Fest. But we have taken it upon ourselves to bear the majority of the financial burden because in order for us to invite other churches to join us in this, we don't want it to be already, hey, join us in this and now put forward $1,000. So instead, we ask the other churches to join us, and if they want to contribute something, they can, but the majority of the financial burden is being borne by us. And we like it that way in the short term. In the future, maybe it'll be a little bit more collaborative financially, but we're just excited to be working with the other churches pragmatically. But anyway, as you look on this slide, we've got a couple of different things that have been identified. We've got the cotton candy, the general supplies, a porta potty or more than one, generators, and snow cones. And we're asking for people to sponsor one or more of these different things. And so if you would like to give to one of these, our online giving system allows you to designate gifts to FunFest, but we don't have it so granular as giving designated gifts to the porta potties. So if you want to sponsor one of these particular things, donate to the FunFest. You can write a check and put FunFest on the memo line, or you can use our live app to go to our online donation form in our app, whether you're on iOS or Android. There's a menu option on the left-hand side that lets you give online. Or from our website, LafayetteCC.org/give, or you could text the word give to our giving robot, 231-2333, all kinds of things you can do. But anyway, if you want to give to one of these specific things, you have to let us know personally. So talk to me, talk to Pastor Billy, or just somehow send an email to the office letting us know that donation you gave, you want it to go to that specific thing. Otherwise, just give to the Fun Fest, and we'll route the money as much as we can to the next neediest location or spot. But I wanted to draw your attention to that because we are asking for people to give some cash towards this thing so we can make it happen. As Jacob said, over 1,000 people come to this Fun Fest every time we do it. This will be our second springtime one, and we are so excited about what's going to happen in it. And that is April 15th, so we're a month away. So that's why we're trying to raise all this money right now. One more thing I'll say about upcoming events. We haven't really promoted this a whole lot, but in 2 weeks, we have Easter. So next Sunday is the 25th, and the next Sunday is April 1st. And it's awesome because on April Fool's Day, Jesus gets to come out of the grave and be like, ha ha, fooled you. So anyway, that's just... that's not really nice. But anyway, so we're gonna talk about Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus from the dead on April 1st. It's gonna be phenomenal, and I encourage you to invite some people to come. But I also encourage you, if you can, to make plans to come to our 9 o'clock hour. Our 9 o'clock hour right now has fewer people in it, but on Easter Sunday, generally we get a lot more people who come to Sunday morning. And if they all come to the 10:45 slot, then it'll be difficult to get you all inside. So I'm asking for some of you to come on Easter Sunday at 9 o'clock instead of 10:45, and that way we'll have a little bit more balance between all the different worship gatherings that we have. But that's all my announcement type stuff. And let's pray and let's get into God's Word. Heavenly Father, I pray that you would guide our time in your Word today. I pray that you would lead us to hear you, that we would be able to get a glimpse of your will for our lives, that you would speak into our hearts. Father, I pray that the things that I say that are true, you would allow to sink down into our hearts. And if I say anything that isn't exactly according to your will, would you let it just slide away from us? Father, I pray you'd guard the words that I speak and the thoughts in our hearts, and that you would shape what happens here in this place to bring you honor and glory for your name's sake and for your will to be done in this world. Lord, we thank you for this time. We give it to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So you're going to need to grab your note sheet if you got one on your way in and a Bible, or you can open up our live event notes in our app or on our website. Get yourself on the same digital page as what shows up on the screen here, and we'll all be able to study this stuff together. We're in a series called #Wisdom, and underneath that, it's a sub-series called #Money. What we're doing is we're going through the book of Proverbs, and if you've ever read through the book of Proverbs, you know that it's got a ton of little statements that are just short little statements about something, and then as you keep reading, you find another statement that's about something different. And the more you read, the more different statements you find, and it's kind of like reading a Twitter feed. If you've ever read a Twitter feed or a social media feed of any sort, what you'll find is it's a whole bunch of just like random stuff, one right after the other, and it's hard to pay attention to what kind of overall theme there is, because Twitter doesn't have an overall theme. Facebook doesn't have an overall theme. And in fact, Proverbs doesn't really have an overall theme other than help you get more wisdom. And so as you just read through the book, sometimes it's hard to figure out what exactly you're supposed to be learning. And so what we've been doing over the past few weeks is we've been taking the book of Proverbs and we've been compartmentalizing it into different categories. We started by talking about just wisdom in general, and now we're talking about money. And we're taking the different principles that we find in the book of Proverbs on money, and we've been reading them as a clump and then talking about them to try to understand what the money principles are from Proverbs. At the end of this month, we're going to shift on to a couple other principles, and we'll finally finish up Proverbs in a few more weeks. But right now, we're thick in the middle of this money stuff, thick in the middle of the money talk. And so I want to just remind you of one other thing that we've been doing, and that is homework. Every single week, I've been assigning you homework, and this week is no different. So every day of this week, including today at 6 a.m., there's going to be a post on our website. If you just follow the links to the blogs and then the devotionals, you'll find the daily news that comes in, or from our app, just go right to the devotional blogs. But every morning at 6 a.m., there's going to be a Bible passage that'll get posted there that's on money. But this week, you're not going to be reading anything from Proverbs. This week, we're reading verses entirely from the New Testament. So I've given you 7 days of reading of the New Testament's teaching on money. And then next week we're going to be talking about kind of what that all means. But for today, we're dealing with money from the book of Proverbs mostly. We've covered a few important principles already. First of all, priorities in money. We put God first, and then the future, and then others, and then ourselves. That's our priority list. Then last week we talked about the fact that diligence can help you get wealth. But diligence plus goodness will help you get blessing. And it's far better to receive blessing from God than it is to receive wealth from the world. Today, we're going to be talking about responsibility, and specifically, we're going to be talking about debt. Which is why we asked the question earlier today of how many student loans you have. And if today's your first time with us, I'm sorry to be so invasive about your money. It's just, forgive us. No one ever answers our questions anyway. And so we just, put them out there for fun. It's kind of like a joke. If you did answer it, well then thank you, because you're being honest and a person of integrity. But I'll let you know that today we're talking about debt, and so that's the whole reason why we asked that question. Now, what I want to do is I want to start us with Proverbs chapter 13. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 7. We'll put it up on the screen, and let me share this with you. Proverbs 13:7 says this: "One person pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. And so this is the kind of thing you find all over in Proverbs. Little tiny statements like this that sort of sound like someone posted it to Twitter. It's a tiny little thing, and you just read it and you just move right along. And you're like, okay, so fine, there are people who pretend things. Let's just move on. But if you stop and if you slow down, something shows up here that is challenging. Let me ask you this proverb in a different way. How many people do you know in your life, or do you know anyone in your life, who pretends to be wealthier than they are? Or let me change the question a little bit. Is there anyone in your life who appears to be wealthier than they actually are? Yeah, you should be nodding because you're looking at him. Okay? I am a person who appears to be wealthier than I am, as do all of us. Let me explain what I mean. Okay, so I'm doing better now. In fact, now I'm doing fairly well. My wife and I, we've paid off all the student loans that we had. We've paid off all of our cars. Our house is not paid off yet, but our credit cards, we don't have any debt on it that doesn't get paid off at the end of every month. And so we're doing fairly well. And if you take all the stuff that we own and you subtract all that we owe, you get a positive number. It's not big, but it's positive, okay? There's something on the other side of this sentence, this math sentence, that is higher than zero, and that's not a bad thing. So in that sense, I am not totally pretending. I actually do have a somewhat positive net worth, which is new for me. Now, for many people, in fact, for probably a lot of us in this room, if you take everything you own and subtract all you owe, you probably end up with a red number, a negative number, something below zero. And listen, I know I've been there. Many of us have been there. A lot of us are there right now. But the point of that is that we all look wealthier than we are. We all look richer than we are. And that proverb tells us some people pretend to be rich when they really have nothing. How do we do that? How is this so prevalent, so popular, so universal in our society? Well, it's been made popular, it's been made possible by one principle called debt. Write this down. This is your first debt principle today. Debt allows us to pretend to be something we are not. Debt allows us to pretend to be something we are not. If I were being a little bit more cynical, I would say debt empowers us to be irresponsible. Debt empowers us to be irresponsible. If you had to be totally responsible for all of your financial obligations without debt, you'd probably be in trouble. But at least if you never got into debt, there's a possibility that you could be responsible over your financial obligations because your financial obligations would be so much smaller. And the same goes true for all of us. The more debt we have, the more debt we need to keep moving forward, so we think. Debt empowers us to be irresponsible. Now, our problem, I could be one of these guys who says, okay, I'm a Christian, and my Bible tells me that all debt is sin, and if you get a loan, you're going to hell. Now, I could tell you that, but I'm not going to. In fact, we're doing the Dave Ramsey course here, and he might be inclined to tell you that all debt is wrong, and you should always avoid all debt. I don't think he'd say you were going to hell if you had debt. Incidentally, I think tomorrow we might be talking about debt a little bit, so if you want to come to the class right here tomorrow night, go ahead and come. But anyway, so I'm not going to be one of those guys who just simply says all debt is wrong. But I'm going to tell you this. If you're going to debt, you need to debt responsibly. Okay? Write it down this way. The wise person uses debt responsibly. My goal today is I want to try to help you move towards responsibility when it comes to your viewpoint, your approach towards debt. Let me share with you a couple verses here from Proverbs. It says this: it's a trap to dedicate something rashly and only later to consider one's vows. It's a trap to dedicate something rashly and only later to consider one's vows. I remember a while ago, my friend told me they were moving, and I told them I would help. It just so happened that they were moving on a day that I already had another commitment, and I didn't realize I had that other commitment until later on after I had made my commitment to my friend. And so my friend, I had dedicated myself to my friend a little rashly, hadn't checked the calendar, and then later I considered the vow that I made, and I realized I couldn't keep both commitments. And so which commitment do you think I was going to keep? The commitment where I was going to be going somewhere and doing something, or the commitment where I was going to be carrying a couch? Well, I called my friend up and I was like, I'm sorry, I can't make it. I've double booked that day. And so I'm picking this other thing instead of you. And I didn't tell him I was picking this other thing instead of you. I just told him I couldn't do it. But I felt so bad. It took me 3 days to make that phone call because all that time I felt trapped. How many of us have done that financially? Where we enter into some sort of commitment and we make the commitment. It's a little bit rash, but we think it's going to be good for us. And then, later on, we consider the vow that we made. It's a trap. However, let's move on. Look at the next verse. It says, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. This is the most famous Dave Ramsey verse. He quotes it like 2 or 3 times every one of his shows. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. It's just an illustration that when you borrow money from someone, you are then obligated to that person the same way a slave is obligated to a master. I know someone once who bought a Dodge Neon, okay? And Dodge Neons about 15 years ago were a bad buy. So here's the thing. Dodge Neons were these little cars, if you're too young to know, it's all right. Dodge Neons were these little cars that were trying to get on the Volkswagen Bug market. They had these cute little headlights for eyes and this tiny little body, and people thought they looked sporty and cute at the same time. And so they became super popular. Lots of people were buying the cars, including some guys were buying the cars to try to soup them up and try to make them even more, higher powered. And Dodge sold a couple that were supposed to be higher powered kind of cars. But the problem was, since so many people thought these cars were cute, the prices skyrocketed. And so the purchase price for a new Dodge Neon was way higher than what it should have been. You should have negotiated these guys down significantly, but the person I knew just bought it. What happened was, within a couple years, the thing was breaking down. Within a couple years, the thing had all kinds of problems. And that wasn't the problem. Cars break down. Cars have problems. The problem was that my friend had purchased this car at this level, but its real value was this level, and their debt was this level. And so they were what we call upside down in the car. If the car had been completely totaled and paid for by the best insurance program in the world, they still would have owed money on this car. That's one of those experiences where I got to see firsthand how someone that I knew and cared about and loved was a slave, because there was this thing hanging over them that they could not get out of even if they wanted to. Look at this next verse. It says, do not be one who shakes hands in pledge or puts up security for debts. If you lack the means to pay, your very bed will be snatched from under you. Listen, we are right next door to an example of this. I mean, not next door, but 2 doors down. There's Toys R Us. And maybe you heard that Toys R Us has gone bankrupt and no one wants to buy them because they just don't have enough assets that are worth anything. Because if you go too much into debt and you put all that you have up to security for that debt, what could happen is you could lose everything that you had. All of it. And so they're liquidating the stores. It's going to be totally gone. And there's going to be another vacant building right near us that we're going to need to raise some money to buy. I'm just saying. So here's the deal. Write this down. Every debt is a risky promise. Every debt is a risky promise. It's you making a promise that's very risky. Now, I'm going to warn you, a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is just my own little creative ideas. Because even though some people might want to tell you that the Bible has a lot to say about debt, it only has a lot to say about a few kinds of debt. And we live in a society that is very creative with our debt, and we've come up with lots of ways to do debt. we've done debt in ways that you don't even know you're in debt, but you are. I'll just give you an example. Cell phone contracts. That's debt. Even though we don't think of it as a loan, it's actually debt. Or you think about maybe a subscription service that you've signed on for, or something along these lines where to get out of it, you have to pay a penalty of some kind. We have all kinds of debt in our lives where we sign up, we get a benefit, and then later on we have to pay for it. We have all kinds of debt. And so because we live in a society that has just got tons and tons of debt, I figured what I needed to do today is to give you some practical advice, even though there isn't a whole lot of specific detail in the Bible on these particular kinds of debts. So if you'll indulge me a little bit, some of what I'm going to share with you today is just kind of my ideas, and maybe you'll think they're good and maybe you'll think they're not good. But when I read passages from the scripture and put them up on the screen, I want you to know that those things are binding, all right? So let me give you a couple of my ideas right now. I'm going to help you understand what I think are good risks and what are some bad risks. If all debt is a risky promise, you need to know what kind of risks you're entering into. And so let me tell you what I think are some good risks. Some good risks. Let's look at the first one. Let's go on, put it up on the screen. The first good risk is when there is a high probability of success. When there's a high probability of success. So I'm going to enter into a risk, and there's a high probability of success. I'll tell you an example of this. Home loans, high probability that they go up in value. Okay? The house goes up in value. The loan, you just pay it off. So there's a high probability of success in the sense that it's going up in value, and so, if I work hard, then most of the time I'll be able to pay off this debt. The next one is ability to overcome the loss. Again, a home loan is an example of this. Because when you buy a house, it only takes you about a year before you have enough equity in the house that you could then sell the house and get out of the house and pay off the whole loan. So you're not upside down in that loan for very long. So your ability to overcome that loss is not a bad thing. If something bad happens on this risk and you have something else to cover the bad, then that's not necessarily a bad risk. And the third one I want to mention is when risk A reduces risk B. Now, this is crazy. Maybe some of you are into business or you're into finance and you might understand what this is all about. I'm not going to explain it too much because I don't understand all of it. But I do know that there are some kinds of financial risks where if you enter into this risk, it makes this one over here more likely to succeed. And so one risk can help another risk be less risky, and sometimes that first risk is a good risk to take. But, it's complicated, and for most of us, we don't need to enter into the balancing, juggling of risks. But let's talk about some bad risks. These are just, my assessment of some things that I think would be bad risks. The first bad risk is a risk that jeopardizes your future. A risk that jeopardizes your future. You could make a financial decision today that if you fail, it ruins your life for a long time. That would be a bad risk. You might think it's a good thing, but if it fails, it will ruin you. Investing all your money in some crazy stock, something along those lines, that could be a bad risk because it jeopardizes your entire future. The second bad risk would be something that's completely outside of your control. Something totally outside of your control. There are a lot of loans or debts or risks that we take where it's up to us to pay it off, and it's up to us to take care of the situation. I'll give you an example. Again, the home loan is one where it's a lot under my control. Yeah, something could happen to me, but I have life insurance, I've got disability insurance, we've got different kinds of insurance so that if something were to happen to make it that we couldn't pay it off, it would get paid off. In other words, it's still under our control in a lot of ways. There's some debts that are not under your control, and we'll talk about one specifically today, and that's a bad risk. Okay, so now let's talk about being responsible. Being responsible with our debt. Again, these are just my 2 cents, but I'm going to share with you some specific debts that I think are responsible, and some specific ones that I think are irresponsible. Let's start with the one I've mentioned a couple times already, home mortgage. So I think a home mortgage is a responsible debt, and I actually found a verse on this. Okay? So here's a verse out of Proverbs. It says this: a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. This proverb is telling us about inheritance. A good person is going to do something to set up an inheritance for their children. It's ironic, I think, that in our society, there's one word that means both inheritance and house. It's the word estate. Estate. It can refer to the inheritance you leave to your children. It can also refer to all of the real property of real value that you have, particularly your house and the land that it's on. So that's one of the reasons why they call it real estate. It's talking about real value, real property, and it's something that lasts. It's not just something that you consume. It's something that lasts. And so this inheritance thing is actually interesting to me because the home mortgage is the one kind of debt, maybe there are a couple others, but it's the one kind of debt that is actually very similar to a savings account, very similar to an investment. Let me share this with you. I've made a little chart. On the left-hand side of this chart, you will see renters. On the right-hand side of the chart, you will see an owner, someone who has bought a house with debt and they're paying off the mortgage. So the renter, let's assume that both of these people are paying $1,000 a month for their rent or mortgage, whatever it is. If they're both paying $1,000 a month over 30 years, that means the renter and the owner are going to spend the same amount of money in that. It's going to be $360,000 over the course of 30 years. What's different, though, is that the guy who owns has the extra burden of maintenance. He's going to have to replace the roof on his house. He's going to have to replace the flooring sometime. He's going to have to fix that toilet. And so I just threw in an extra $20,000 over the 30 years. Maybe that's cheap. Let's put it up at $40,000. If you make it $40,000, then that person is going to be spending $400,000 over the course of 30 years. Okay? Now, let's just put that up there. To own the house, it's going to cost you maybe $380,000. But at the end of that, you're going to have equity. And the equity is $250,000 because that's what the house was worth when you bought it. Now, let's put that next one up there. And Charlie, let's put the next one also up. If you rent, you've saved yourself $20,000 of maintenance costs. But at the end of 30 years, you got nothing. So that's why a home mortgage can be a responsible debt. It's a way for you to invest, and even though you aren't making the interest now, you at least are putting your money into something that holds value. So you put in $380, you own $250. That's not necessarily positive, but at least it's way better than the alternative. Way better than the renter. So responsible debt number one, home mortgage. That's pretty obvious. Lots of people talk about it that way. Let's look at responsible debt number two. I think it's possibly student loans. Now, I put a maybe on this one because I've known a lot of people who go into a lot of debt with student loans and it doesn't pay off for them. Now, statistically, it pays off. Statistically, people who go to college end up making more over their lifetime than people who don't go to college. Statistically, on average, people who go to college end up with a happier general life than people who don't go to college. But guess what? It's not always that way. Let me share with you one example. Okay, so I'm going to compare a teacher and a mechanic. Now, a teacher will go to school for 4 years. And I've picked a teacher who is really smart. They got into a private school, but they worked really super hard for 4 years. And so they got out of the private school, and it was a cheap private school, but they got out of the private school owing only half of the total cost of school in student loans. They paid for the other half as they went through it because they really worked hard. So now they leave school, they've got $50,000 in loans. For some of you with student loans, you're like, man, I wish I only had $50,000 in student loans. But anyway, so this teacher is getting out of school with $50,000 in student loans. They get an average teacher salary for the country, not Indiana, for the country, $60,000. If you're in Indiana, it's worse. But in the country, the average salary is $60,000 for a teacher. And at age 62, they will have made $2.35 million. And you're like, how do people make so much money? And I'm like, you're making that much money right now. It's just this person didn't spend any of it. Okay, I'm not saying how much they've spent. I'm just saying they've made $2.35 million, okay? Now, what about a mechanic? The mechanic, have you played that game of life? The little plastic cars, and you can choose college, and you get that loan, and then you do that, and then you choose just going right into work. You start earlier, you get on the game board earlier, but for whatever reason, they never win. I don't know what the deal is. Anyway, so the college people, it takes them longer, but the mechanic, he gets to work sooner. 4 years sooner, he starts working. He has no loan at all, 0 college debt, 0 student loans. His hourly wage, let's just make it $35 an hour average over the course of his entire working career. He's going to start lower than that, but he's going to end way higher than that. Mechanics who are really, really good at their trade could get maybe $60, maybe even $70 an hour, I don't know. But let's just start him at $35 to say that's his average for his whole life. Guess what? He makes his $2.35 million when he's 53. 9 years earlier than the teacher does. So I'm not saying that you should all be mechanics. And I'm not saying you should all be teachers. What I'm saying is you're going to choose your career based on a lot of things other than money. But student loans might be a good investment. They might not be a good investment. And it all depends on what happens after the student loan, after the college experience. Nonetheless, I think it could be a responsible debt. Another responsible debt, I think, is working capital. It's called working capital. Working capital is the debt that a retailer takes when they take out a loan to buy a product that they have on hand, so now they have inventory that they can sell and make money on. Working capital is what a farmer takes out in a debt and a loan so he can buy seeds, so he can plant them in the ground, so they can grow, so he can harvest them, and he can sell the crops that he grows. Working capital is when you take a debt to do the thing that your job needs you to do so that you can make the income that you need to do. I view working capital like renting a tool. When we built this building, when we remodeled this building, we had to rent some tools for this building because there's no reason for us to own some of those tools. We rented some of those things. We're not using them all the time. It makes a lot more sense for us to rent them. Same thing goes with me in my backyard. One time I rented an aerator for my backyard, and I walked through my backyard and I had this aerator machine and it pulled out all these plugs from my grass, but I don't want to own that machine. I don't want to keep it around, and so I just rented it once. And so renting a tool is definitely a good use of your money. And renting money is one way of viewing working capital. Now, some of you in this room are businessmen, and you know how this works. Some of you aren't businessmen, and you should stop thinking about working capital right now because it doesn't apply to you. You think you're doing working capital, and you're just, running a credit card. But anyway, so for business people, I just wanted the business people in the room to know that I think some kind of working capital debt might be responsible in certain circumstances. But I want to spend some time talking about irresponsible debt. And the first one, of course, is credit cards. So let me tell you how I use credit cards. Someone told me about this a long time ago, like maybe 15 years ago, I heard this. And I started living by this principle. And I failed many, many times. Because credit cards are super, super dangerous. But I have finally gotten myself to the place of discipline, so I want to let you know how I do it. Like in the Dave Ramsey class, he's going to make us cut up our credit cards. And I've got a couple credit cards I don't want to cut up, and I'll tell you why. I have one credit card that my wife uses that she gets Disney points. Disney rewards points. I don't know what that means. I just know we get them. I have a card where we get cash back. I know what that means. I have it linked to my Amazon account, so every now and then I'm on Amazon, and it's like, you have $60 cash back, and I'm like, ooh, free money. No, don't do it, don't do it, don't. That's how I view it. So I've got a card that gives me cash back. She's got a rewards card. What we do is then we use those for our transactions, for almost all of our transactions, and we have a checking account that is an interest-bearing checking account. So during the month, the checking account is making interest, and we're using credit cards, and then I have automatically told my bank to pay off all our credit cards 100% every single month, all the time, no questions asked. And so all month long, I'm freaking out scared. Because I know at the end of the month, this thing is going to happen, and I have to make sure there's enough stuff in the bank so that when the credit card payments come out, it comes out and everything is kosher. And so that keeps me limited with what I'm doing with the credit card thing. But at the end of the year, we've made some interest on our checking account. We've borrowed money for 30 days at a time from the credit cards, and they've given us these reward points, and it's kind of working for us. But I'm warning you, that is the only possible way I think credit cards are even validly useful, because every other way of using them will lead you to something that I call deficit thinking. Let me give you an example. Let's say you build a building and realize the building is terrible and you want to tear the building down and start over again, like we want to do next door. So there's a building and you want to tear it down and start over again. When you're tearing the building down, when do you stop? It's easy. When you get to the ground, right? It's flat. When you get to the ground, you stop tearing down, right? It's simple. But let me ask you a similar question. When you're digging a hole, how do you know when to stop? That's the problem. Because when you're digging a hole, if you're digging a hole, there's no bottom all that you're trying to get to. And sometimes you're trying to get to something down there, like a treasure chest, if you know where it is. And if you do, let me know, because I'll help you dig. But if you're digging a hole, just digging a hole, then there's no, real bottom. You stop at 1 foot? Do you stop at 2 feet? Do you stop at 3 feet? Do you stop at $1,000? Do you stop at $4,000? How far down into the deficit hole are you going to go before you hit the bottom? That's the problem. There is no bottom, because they keep throwing you more credit cards. They keep giving you more opportunity to get into debt. And they're like, oh, you're in debt? Have some more. We'd love to give you this stuff. There's just no bottom. And so unless you create for yourself a rock solid bottom of 0, then credit cards are super, super dangerous. It's an irresponsible debt. Now I want to skip ahead to the next one. The next one I think is irresponsible. You're not going to like me. I don't think my wife is going to like me. But it's car loans. I think car loans are an irresponsible debt. Now, back in 2012, we got a car, and we got a loan for it. We had 2 cars. We had a 1999 Honda CR-V, still do. It's almost 19 years old this August. Fabulous car. I love having old cars. I'll tell you why later. But we have a 1999 Honda CR-V. We also had a 95 Jeep Wrangler. Fabulous car. Loved it. It was great little car. And then one day when I was driving, the Jeep went, ka-choo! And it didn't do anything after that. And so I had it brought to the mechanic that I was trusting at the time. And the mechanic told me that the engine was locked up and it would never run again, and I needed to junk it. Would I like him to take it from me? I said, no, thank you. I will get a second opinion. And I got a guy from this church to put it on a trailer, and we took it over to his dad's house, and he looked at it, and 5 hours later, he had it running. And he charged me something like $15 for the part that he needed to put in there, because something was stuck and the other guy didn't know about it, but this guy fixed it. $15. Well, the problem was there was about a week's worth of time between when the ka-chunk happened and when we discovered that the car would still run. And during that week, we bought a car, because we were told that the car would never run again. And I love my wife. And so we bought her a pretty black Volkswagen Passat, brand new, signed a 0.9% financing deal on this thing, and they included a warranty that lasted for 4 years, and they included all the maintenance, including oil changes for the first 5 years, and it was awesome. It was so cool, and we're yes, let's do this thing. And we did it, and it was awesome, and we still like the car. Imagine that. Still like the car. That was back in 2012, and it's all paid off now and everything. We ended up having to sell the Jeep because we'd bought this Volkswagen, and so anyway, what I want to do, though, is I want to let you know something that I didn't think about back then. Now, we hadn't saved up to buy a car. But I didn't think about this back then. I do want you to think about it with me now. What's the difference between buying now and waiting 3 years? Let me show you something. If we start out and we take the now car, I'm going to put up this little chart that gives you some math, some numbers on the now car. So let's put it up there. The now car, you're going to make payments, let's just say payments of $450 a month for the life of the loan. But let's just only think about the first 3 years. Okay, so 450 payments a month for the first 3 years. During the first 3 years of us owning the Volkswagen, we paid $400 in maintenance costs because they paid for the oil changes and the warranty things if there were any, but there were a couple other things that we still had to cover, and that was about $400. We spent a total of $16,800, and the resale value, the residual value of the car at the end of that was $15,000. At the end of 3 years, the residual value on the car was $15,000, and we still owed $11,000. Now, I know that's a lot of numbers, so now let me show you what I could have done and what, in retrospect, I really want to do if we ever face this situation again, and that is wait 3 years. Look at this. We could save $450 a month. If we had some beater old used car, like keeping the Jeep, repairs would have been around $1,500 for the 3 years. It's about $500 a month, $500 a year to keep that Jeep running. And so $1,500 for 3 years. We would have saved $14,700. Oh, and the residual value of the 3-year-old Volkswagen is $15,000. Do you suppose there's any dealer in town that I could have walked in with $14,700 in cash and said, I'd like that $15,000 car here? Do you suppose there's any dealer in town that would say no to me? I think pretty much all of them would be like, yoink, keys. You know? I think that's the way that transaction would go. And then my loan amount would be $0. And I could start it over again, and 3 years from then, buy another. I could have had the exact same car. I could have had the exact same car and just waited 3 years and then been like twice ahead. It's an amazing bit of math there, but I just want to let you know that in almost every case, car loans are an irresponsible debt. I'll give you just one other quick one, and this is 6 years total cost of ownership, because sometimes people say, no, I'm going to buy the new car because the old cars, you just have to spend too much money in repairs. The old cars are great. I want a reliable vehicle that I don't have to worry about. It's the old cars that you have to spend money on repairs. I want to get that new one. Well, here's 6 years total cost of ownership. Just put both of them up there on the screen. And we'll see that at the very bottom, after 6 years, if I had bought the car new, I would have spent $28,800. But if I kept a used car for 3 years and then bought the same car and had it for 3 years, the total amount of money I would have spent was $20,600. Total cost of ownership is cheaper when you live used. I'm just saying. That's not in the Bible, but I'm just saying. I want to give you a couple other irresponsible debts, and the next one I'm going to give you is right out of the Bible. In fact, there's only one reason I would even bring it up, and it is that it is the debt most often talked about in the Bible. Would you know? Check it out. Irresponsible debt, co-signing a loan for someone else. I'll give you 3 verses. Look at that. Gold mine. Proverbs chapter 17. Look at this one. One who has no sense shakes hands in pledge and puts up security for a neighbor. I can't get more blunt than that. You got nothing in your head if you co-sign for someone else. Apparently that's what it's saying. One who has no sense puts up security for a neighbor. Look at the next one. It says, whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer, but whoever refuses to shake hands in pledge is safe. Now, both of these you might say, oh, but that's talking about someone I don't know. That's talking about a stranger. Of course I wouldn't do something as foolish as co-signing a loan for a stranger, but for someone I love and someone I care about, maybe I could get into that. No, watch out for that one too. But before we get there, let me share with you the last thing that Solomon has to say about co-signing. Take a look at this. He says, my son, if you've put up security for your neighbor, oh, now it's someone closer to you. If you've put up security for your neighbor, If you've shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you've been trapped by what you said, ensnared by the words of your mouth. Keep going. He says, so do this, my son, to free yourself. Since you've fallen into your neighbor's hands, go to the point of exhaustion and give your neighbor no rest. Allow no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the snare of the fowler. This is the one debt that, like the Bible, spends a lot of energy on. Don't do it. Don't become responsible for someone else's irresponsibility. For some reason, we think it's the loving thing to do to help someone else get in debt. It's the loving thing for me to do to put someone else into slavery. This person can't buy that car unless I sign it with them. So don't buy the car. I'm just saying, it's actually in the text. Don't do it. Now, there are always exceptions. My father-in-law co-signed the loan that Jen bought her first car with, and I totally forgive him for that, because it was that car that brought her out to California where she met me. And I am so cool with that. But actually, the reason he signed it wasn't that he knew she couldn't handle it and he had to step in. He signed it because he liked being responsible for the safety of his daughter. And if she was going to be 2,000 miles away from him, he wanted her to be in the absolute safest possible thing that she could. But he wasn't going to make the payments on it. And so he was going to make sure she was as safe as possible, so he was willing to make the payments on it. If you are willing to pay the entire debt, then okay, fine, co-sign. But if you're not willing, and I don't know why you would be, don't bother. And that leads me to the next one. We're almost done. But the last one that I want to draw your attention to, that I think has some real strong biblical principles on simple, practical debt, is don't ever sign a debt or give some debt or loan some money to a family or friend. Deuteronomy does this interesting thing. I'm not going to read the entire section for you, but in Deuteronomy 15 and then also later on in some other passages in Deuteronomy, God says something really interesting. He says, don't loan money to your fellow Israelite and charge them interest. You can charge interest to foreigners, he says, but not to your fellow Israelite. On top of that, God also said, after every 7 years, wipe out all debts to your fellow Israelites. If your fellow Israelite asks for money in year number 6, go ahead and loan it to him, even though next year you have to forgive that debt. God says, don't ever let money become something that gets in the way of your relationship with the other people here. And the reason God tells us he wants us to do that with our family and him is that he wants to be the one who blesses. He says, I'm going to bless you. And so if you give money to that person, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to take care of you. You don't need them to pay you back. I'll pay you back. That's basically what God is saying. He says, I'm going to bless you. So don't put your friend or your family member underneath an obligated yoke to you. Listen, if you need them to pay you back, then you can't let go of the money. If you can let go of the money all the way, then let go of the money all the way. But don't make them be obligated to you. Now, the last thing I want to say on all this is actually the most important, but it doesn't take a lot of time. You see, the reason why the debt talk is important is not because you're going to get yourself into some sort of debt that is just irresponsible and then you're going to regret it later on. Although I do want to prevent that if I can. I'm going to make some mistakes and I'm going to end up one of these days, my credit card scheme that I'm doing isn't going to work as well as I thought it would, and I'm going to have to pay some late fees or something else stupid, because that's the way credit cards work. They always find a way to get you. We're all going to make mistakes on all this stuff, but I want you to know why I'm even talking about it. And it's that debt has the power in our lives to touch us in a very deep sin and give it power. That sin is called greed. See, we live in a world that repeatedly tells you you don't have enough. There's something more. You don't have enough. There's something more. This is the sin of the Garden of Eden. God gave Adam and Eve a beautiful garden with all these trees, with all this fruit. And he said, feel free to eat from any of them. Eat from any one of these trees. Just don't eat from the tree that'll kill you. And they go, oh, but now it looks good. That's the way we all are. We believe that for some reason God is holding back on us. And there's this leftover stuff out there that if we want it, we have to get it for ourselves. It's called greed. A sense of dissatisfaction with God being enough. And so I want to give you one last irresponsible debt. And this last irresponsible debt is any debt that feeds my greed. Any debt that feeds my greed. See, debt gives us the power to pretend that we have more than we've been given. That is almost the definition of greed. To desire more than we've been given. And that is powered in our society by debt. Let me read you a couple final verses here. In 1 Timothy 6, Paul writes to Timothy and he says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. He says, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Oh, I want you to not be pierced by many griefs. Oh, I want you to be like that instruction Solomon gave to his son. Don't let sleep come to your eyes. Free yourself. If there's a responsibility, if there's a debt, if there's some sort of thing hanging over your head that you need to take care of it fast. Because the longer the deficit exists in your life, the more willing you are to give in to the next temptation. The more willing you are to let greed fester still. But godliness with contentment is great gain. Let me invite you to take some time here in reflection. What is God saying to your heart? What is He whispering into your soul in this moment? Is He teaching you something? Maybe you want to write that down. Maybe you want to put that into our live event check-in and add that to our prayer request list, or just give us some feedback on what God is doing in your life today. But I want to give you some moments just to reflect on these things. Let me pray for you. God in heaven, we live in a world that is financially complicated. And there's so many different things that we are able to be a part of. We are able to purchase. We are able to acquire. And yet, God, we recognize that what we really need is just what you want to give. Father, I pray that you would liberate us from the greed that's in our souls. That you would remove from us the temptation to acquire what you haven't given. You would give us strength to resist it when it shows up. And you would give us wisdom to not put ourselves into a position where we feel like we have to exercise greed in order to get what we think we need. God, I pray that you would just remind us that you're enough. Would you remind us of your wonderful name, your wonderful presence, how beautiful it is that we can just know you, how beautiful it is that you have given us yourself. Father, may we not reach for what you have not given.
Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. You didn't want heaven without us. So Jesus, you brought heaven down. My sin was great, your love was greater. What can separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. How sweet the sound, how good you are. I love to sing of your name, Lord. I love to sing of who you are. Death could not hold you. They'll torn me for you. You silenced the boast of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, the praise of your glory. For you are raised to life again. You have no rival, you have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory, yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. You have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom, yours is the glory, yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a powerful name it is. Nothing can stand against. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus.
Listen, we've got an incredible truth. God, the creator of the universe, has promised that he wants to bless us, has promised that he wants to be with us, has promised that he will give himself to us. So as we go from this place today, we don't need to be the people who feel needy. We can be the people who feel blessed. So as you go from this place, be blessed and be a blessing. We'll see you next week.